My name is Allison, 33 years old, and I watched the man I built a $50 million empire for hand my life over to the woman who abandoned him when he had nothing. I stood backstage as he looked into a microphone and told 300 elites I was fired. He thought stripping my title and humiliating me publicly would break me. He had no idea that hours later I would be sitting in the office of his biggest rival, watching the CEO dial his father to say he found a daughter-in-law and a weapon to destroy my ex. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever turned a massive betrayal into your greatest success. The ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel in Seattle was draped in silver and blue silk, the colors of Apex Logistics. It was our fifth anniversary gala, celebrating how far we had come from a tiny office above a diner. I stood backstage, my heart racing with exhaustion and pride. As Chief Strategy Officer, I spent 5 years pouring my soul into this company. I engineered the supply chain models. I negotiated the brutal vendor contracts. I secured the deals that skyrocketed our valuation to $50 million. Bradley, the CEO I had dated for 4 years, stood at the podium under bright lights. Tonight was supposed to be my crowning achievement. Just that morning over coffee, Bradley kissed my forehead and promised that during his speech he would announce my title change to co-founder. It was a formality, but a symbolic one. I sacrificed my 20s and sleep for his dream, making it our dream. Watching his silhouette through the velvet curtains, I genuinely believed I was looking at my future husband and business partner. I truly believed we were an unstoppable team. The clinking of crystal champagne glasses settled into a quiet, respectful hush as Bradley tapped the microphone. He smiled his signature smile, the one that always worked so perfectly on venture capitalists. He started by thanking our investors, our dedicated staff, and our key partners. I stepped slightly closer to the edge of the curtain, waiting for my cue. My pulse drummed in my ears. But as his speech shifted toward the future and our upcoming Series B funding round, his tone changed. It became oddly distant, practiced, and cold. "We have grown rapidly over these past 5 years," Bradley announced, his voice echoing through the grand ballroom. "But as Apex Logistics prepares to enter a new tier of global investment, we have to recognize that our leadership structure needs to evolve. We can no longer rely on rigid, aggressive tactics. To secure our next round of venture capital, we need a fresh face. We need leadership that embodies warmth, approachability, and family values." My brow furrowed, rigid and aggressive. Those were the exact words a disgruntled competitor had used to describe my negotiation style last month, a style Bradley had praised privately. A strange unease began to pool in my stomach. I looked around the backstage area, noticing for the first time that the event coordinator would not make eye contact with me. "Therefore," Bradley continued, his voice rising over the silent crowd, "I am thrilled to introduce the woman who will be taking over as our new executive leader. Someone who has always had my heart, and who has graciously agreed to return and guide Apex Logistics into its next chapter. Please welcome Savannah to the stage." The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Savannah. Bradley's first love. The woman who had brutally dumped him 8 years ago when his bank account was empty. She had vanished from his life, only to miraculously reappear 2 weeks ago after an article published our valuation. He had told me they simply ran into each other by chance and grabbed a quick coffee. I believed him because I trusted him implicitly. The heavy velvet curtains parted, but not for me. Savannah glided onto the stage from the opposite wing, wearing a stunning red gown that hugged her figure perfectly. She walked up to Bradley, wrapping her arms around his neck, and he kissed her cheek affectionately in front of 300 people. A few confused claps rippled through the audience, mostly from new investors who had no idea who this woman was or what had happened to me. I stepped out from behind the curtain, my vision blurring with pure shock. "Bradley, what is going on?" I demanded, my voice carrying much further than I intended. The entire grand ballroom turned to look at me. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Bradley looked down at me with an expression so devoid of empathy it chilled me to the bone. He leaned into the microphone, ensuring every single person in the room could hear his next words clearly. "Apex needs a softer, more familial touch to lead our new venture capital round. Allison, Your services are no longer needed. A collective gasp swept through the crowd of industry professionals, clients, and employees. These I had personally hired. My feet felt glued to the hardwood floor. Before I could formulate a response to the public firing, heavy footsteps approached from behind. Two large security guards stepped toward me, their hands raised to escort me out. I looked back at the stage. Savannah was smiling warmly down at me, playing the innocent, supportive partner while I was being humiliated in the empire I had built. I did not let the security guards touch me. I raised my hand, a sharp, silent command that stopped them in their tracks. I turned my back on the murmuring crowd, the flashing cameras, and the man who had just dismantled my life for a public spectacle. I walked out of the ballroom with my head held high, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor of the corridor. I bypassed the main exit entirely and headed straight for the private elevator reserved for top executives. I swiped my access badge and pressed the button for the penthouse floor. If Bradley thought I would quietly slip into the Seattle night, he was mistaken. I needed to look him in the eye, away from his captive audience. The ride up was suffocatingly silent, giving me just enough time to process the magnitude of his betrayal. The elevator doors chimed and opened to the top floor of Apex Logistics. Our offices. My office. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the Seattle skyline glittered, a stark contrast to the sterile, tense atmosphere inside. Bradley was already there, having taken the service elevator up after his grand announcement. He stood by his massive mahogany desk, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. He did not look surprised to see me. In fact, he wore a smug, self-satisfied expression that made my stomach churn. He adjusted his expensive tie, the one I had bought him for his birthday just 2 months ago, and offered a condescending smirk. "Bradley," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Explain why you just committed corporate suicide on a hot mic." He took a sip of his amber liquid, leaning casually against his desk. "Let us not make this harder than it needs to be, Allison. I made a business decision. The board and I had a long talk this week. You are brilliant with numbers, sure, but you lack the right energy for this next phase. We need to project stability." "The right energy," I repeated, stepping closer. "I secured the $50 million valuation. I built the logistics algorithm that keeps this company running. What exactly does Savannah bring to the table besides a pretty face and a history of abandoning you?" Bradley sighed, attempting to look like the reasonable one dealing with a hysterical woman. "This is exactly what I mean, Allison. You are too rigid and intimidating for investors. You attack every negotiation like it is a war. Savannah brings a different vibe. She brings wife material energy. The board prefers someone who feels like family, someone who softens our corporate image. You are just too cold." I stared at him, letting the sheer absurdity of his gaslighting wash over me. He was actually trying to convince me that my competence was a flaw, that being a ruthless negotiator on his behalf was somehow detrimental to the empire I built for him. "You are replacing your chief strategy officer with a woman who has zero corporate experience because she has wife material energy," I asked, making sure to enunciate every word. "You are a fool, Bradley. You are letting your bruised ego and some misguided high school fantasy destroy everything we worked for. You just handed the steering wheel to someone who does not even know how to drive." The heavy glass doors behind me swung open. Savannah walked in the red silk of her gown, swishing elegantly against the polished floor. In one hand, she held a crystal flute filled with expensive champagne. In the other, she balanced a cheap, flattened cardboard box. The stark contrast between the luxury of her drink and the garbage she handed me was entirely intentional. She walked with the unearned confidence of someone who had just stolen a winning lottery ticket. She placed the cardboard box on my desk with a pathetic, sympathetic pout. "I am so sorry it had to happen this way," Allison Savannah said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But you know how corporate restructuring goes. It is nothing personal. Thank you for keeping his seat warm, Allison. Leave your keycard." I looked from the cardboard box to Savannah, then to Bradley, who was watching me with a mixture of apprehension and triumph. They expected me to cry. They wanted me to yell, to beg, to validate their decision by acting like the unhinged, bitter ex-girlfriend they were trying to paint me as. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I knew my worth, and it was far beyond this glass cage. I reached up and unclipped the lanyard from my neck. I looked Savannah dead in the eyes. I did not drop a single tear. Instead, I flicked my wrist. The plastic keycard sailed through the air and landed with a sharp splash directly inside Savannah's champagne glass. Golden liquid spilled over the rim, dripping onto her expensive red gown. She gasped, jumping back as the sticky champagne stained the silk. I turned my attention back to Bradley. My voice was ice-cold, perfectly controlled, and loud enough to echo in the cavernous office. You just severed the only artery keeping this company alive. Enjoy the corpse, Bradley. I did not take the cardboard box. I left my personal belongings, the framed photos, the awards, everything. None of it mattered anymore. I turned on my heel and walked out of the executive suite, leaving the two of them standing in the silence of their own making. I stepped back into the elevator, watching the doors close on Bradley's pale face. The descent down to the lobby felt incredibly slow, but my mind was already racing at lightning speed. I walked out of the grand glass doors of the Apex building and into the cool Seattle air. I took one long, deep breath, centering myself entirely. I was done building castles for mediocre men. It was time to build my own empire today. I did not hail a cab back to my apartment. Going home meant stepping into an empty space where the echoes of Bradley's betrayal would bounce off the walls. I refused to waste a single tear on a man who had just traded a multi-million-dollar strategist for a pretty face. Instead, I walked down the rain-slicked pavement to a 24-hour espresso bar. The barista barely glanced up as I ordered a black coffee. I took my drink to a corner table facing the window, set it down, and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated my reflection. I did not look like a woman who had just been publicly humiliated. I looked dangerous. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I assessed the chessboard. Bradley thought he had checkmated me by isolating me from our industry network. He underestimated my capacity for total warfare. If Apex Logistics was going to discard me, I was going to make sure they bled for it. In the corporate world, the fastest way to make a company bleed is to hand their playbook directly to their biggest predator. That predator was Cole Global. They were the Leviathan of the supply chain industry. They had the capital and global reach, but they lacked the aggressive algorithms I had personally designed for Bradley. They were currently bleeding money on a massive Midwest shipping route, a vulnerability I had been exploiting ruthlessly for 2 years. I took a slow sip of coffee. I opened a fresh document and mapped out Cole Global's logistical bottleneck. I knew exactly why their shipping containers sat idle in Chicago freight yards, while Apex trucks bypassed them with priority clearance. I knew the specific software integration failure in their sorting facilities causing it. It was a vulnerability costing them tens of millions per quarter. Bradley thought my strategies were locked behind company firewalls, but he forgot one crucial detail. I did not just memorize the playbook. I wrote it. The routing logic and vendor tactics were burned into my brain. I did not need a keycard to take my intellectual property with me. I just needed the right buyer. I navigated away from the document and opened my encrypted email client. I had no intention of applying through human resources. Submitting a resume through a corporate portal was for eager graduates, not for a chief strategy officer looking to detonate a rival company from the inside out. I needed to speak to the person at the very top of the food chain. I needed Harrison Cole. Harrison was the 34-year-old CEO who had recently taken over operations from his father, Chairman Richard Cole. Industry rumors painted Harrison as a ruthless, highly intelligent executive who valued cold results over corporate pleasantries. Finding his direct corporate email address took me less than 5 minutes of running standard permutation searches. Once verified, I stared at the blank composition window. I did not attach a cover letter outlining my career goals or explain my sudden departure from Apex. Desperation is repulsive to powerful people, and I was not desperate. I was offering a lethal weapon. I kept my pitch to exactly 3 sentences. Mr. Cole, I know exactly why your Midwest shipping routes are hemorrhaging $20 million a quarter, and I know how Apex Logistics has been exploiting that specific blind spot. I am no longer with Apex as of an hour ago. Give me 10 minutes of your time, and I will hand you the blueprint to absorb their market share by the end of the fiscal year. I hit send and closed my laptop with a sharp click. Then I waited. I ordered a second cup of coffee and watched the Seattle traffic blur past the window. The adrenaline from the gala had faded, leaving behind a sharp, icy clarity. I calculated the odds. CEOs like Harrison Cole lived and breathed their companies. If he was half as sharp as the magazines claimed, he would recognize the immense value of a high-ranking defector dropping into his lap. The minutes ticked by. 10, 20, 30. I maintained my steady breathing. Exactly 45 minutes after I pressed send, my phone screen illuminated against the dark wooden table. A single new email notification appeared. The sender was Harrison Cole. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained exactly 3 words. My office, now. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Bradley had fired me thinking I would vanish into obscurity. Instead, he had just handed me the keys to a battleship. I packed my laptop into my leather tote, discarded my coffee cup, and walked out into the crisp night air. Cole Global Headquarters was located only 6 blocks away, a towering monolith of black glass dominating the downtown skyline. The walk there felt incredibly empowering. With every step, I shed the lingering sting of the public humiliation. The victim mentality that usually follows a sudden termination evaporated, completely replaced by a fierce, undeniable sense of purpose. I was not a woman scorned weeping over a broken relationship. I was a corporate strategist executing a hostile pivot. I approached the imposing entrance of the Cole Global skyscraper. The building was a fortress of wealth and power, its massive revolving doors leading into a cavernous lobby lined with imported Italian marble. I walked straight up to the head security officer, my posture radiating absolute authority. My heels echoed sharply in the vast space. I did not look away when the guard met my gaze. "I am Allison," I stated clearly. "Harrison Cole is expecting me." The guard typed my name into his terminal. His eyebrows raised slightly in surprise before his expression smoothed back into professional neutrality. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Cole has authorized your access to the top floor. Please use the executive elevator on your right." He handed me a temporary black access card. It was infinitely heavier and more significant than the cheap plastic badge I had tossed into Savannah's champagne glass. I took the card, gave a curt nod of thanks, and walked toward the elevators. As I stepped inside and swiped the badge, the panel illuminated, locking me in for the express ride to the summit. I watched the floor numbers climb higher and higher, leaving the remnants of my old life far below. I was about to walk into the lion's den, but I was not prey. I was the apex predator they had been waiting for. The elevator doors slid apart, revealing a penthouse suite that felt like a modern art gallery. Slate gray walls, brushed steel accents, and panoramic windows framing the sleeping city dictated absolute authority. There was no reception desk, only an expanse of polished concrete leading to a sleek obsidian desk. Behind that desk sat Harrison Cole. He did not look up from his tablet as my heels echoed across the floor. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, his tie loosened just enough to suggest brutal negotiations. Harrison finally raised his head. His eyes were sharp, analytical, and devoid of warmth. He studied my face for a brief second before picking up a printed dossier. It was my professional file. He did not offer a seat. He did not offer a polite greeting. Instead, he dropped the file onto the obsidian surface with a loud, dismissive smack. He leaned back and folded his arms. "You are the architect who stole our $20 million Midwest shipping contract last quarter," Harrison stated. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "You bypassed our defense protocols, undercut our pricing model by 4%, and poached 3 of our largest regional distributors in a weekend. It was a ruthless, calculated maneuver that cost my company dearly. So tell me, Allison, why are you sitting in my office in the middle of the night?" I did not flinch under his intense scrutiny. I reached out, grabbed one of the heavy leather chairs positioned in front of his desk, and pulled it back. "Because the idiot who runs Apex just fired his brain," I said, my voice matching his cold, professional tone. "I am not here to ask for a job, Mr. Cole. I am here to hand you the blueprint to completely dismantle Apex Logistics within 60 days. A dangerous spark ignited in his eyes. He leaned forward. The space between us crackled with pure, unrestrained ambition. "You have my attention," he murmured softly. "But loyalty is a fragile commodity in this industry. A chief strategy officer who defects to a rival hours after a termination is a liability. You say you can dismantle your former company. I say you might just be a bitter former employee looking for a quick payout. Prove to me that you actually built the engine, and you did not just ride in the passenger seat." "I am not looking for a payout," I replied smoothly. "I am looking for a partnership with the only executive in this city who plays the game at my level. Test me." Harrison fired his first scenario like a bullet. "You claim to understand our Midwest bottleneck. If a fleet routes through the Illinois tollway network carrying hazardous materials and utilizing cross-dock facilities in Ohio, how do you mitigate the dual state tax liabilities without violating the new federal freight regulations that passed last month?" I answered instantly. "You leverage the Section 4B exemption in the new federal guidelines by reclassifying freight as staging inventory. Hold the cargo at a subsidiary warehouse just over the Indiana border for exactly 4 hours, triggering a tax loophole that nullifies the transit fee. Apex has been doing it for 18 months, saving 12% per shipment." He launched his second scenario: global supply chain crisis. "The Port of Los Angeles is backed up by 2 weeks. You have $50 million of perishable technology components sitting on a cargo ship. Demurrage fees are compounding daily. Your primary air freight partner declares bankruptcy. How do you honor the client service level agreements without absorbing a massive loss?" "You execute an immediate port diversion to Oakland," I countered sharply. "You utilize maritime law clauses forcing an at-sea transfer to smaller privately contracted vessels that bypass the main port congestion entirely. Then you secure deadhead freight capacity on returning domestic cargo planes at a fraction of the cost using predictive analytics to match flight schedules with warehouse delivery windows. You turn a logistical nightmare into a highly profitable expedited fee." Harrison sat perfectly still. "Final question," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Predictive algorithmic failure in last-mile delivery networks. Your software assigns delivery routes based on historical traffic data, but a sudden unmapped infrastructure project shuts down 3 major arteries in a metropolitan grid. Your fleet is paralyzed. Costs are skyrocketing per minute. Manual rerouting is impossible due to fleet size. What is your immediate protocol?" I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "You abandon the historical data." I maintained eye contact, ensuring he felt the full weight of my expertise. "You activate a decentralized peer-to-peer routing protocol. You push the raw delivery coordinates to a secondary network of independent gig economy drivers pre-vetted in your system. You pay them a premium surge rate for completion within 2 hours, absorbing a short-term margin loss to completely eliminate penalty fees from failed service-level agreements. The algorithm learns new traffic patterns organically through GPS tracking, instantly updating primary fleet routes. It is a self-healing network." Silence descended upon the penthouse office. The only sound was the faint hum of the city traffic far below. Harrison Cole stared directly at me, his sharp eyes calculating. He had thrown 3 of the most brutal logistical nightmares at me, scenarios that would have caused seasoned executives to stumble and sweat. I had annihilated every single question flawlessly, delivering precise and highly actionable solutions without a single second of hesitation. Harrison slowly unclasped his hands and rested them flat on the obsidian desk. The skepticism had completely vanished from his features. In its place was a look of profound, undeniable respect. He recognized that I was not a bitter ex-girlfriend seeking revenge. I was a lethal corporate asset, and I had just proven that I held the keys to the entire industry. I sat back in my chair. The heavy silence in the penthouse suite spoke volumes. Harrison Cole did not need to say a word for me to know I had won. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the cold obsidian desk, his analytical gaze mapping out the exact future of his company with me at the helm. A sharp ringing shattered the quiet atmosphere. The sound came from his personal cell phone. Harrison glanced at the screen, a brief flash of deep annoyance crossing his otherwise stoic face. It was not a corporate call, it was a personal intrusion. He reached out to silence it but stopped. He looked at me, a sudden, highly calculated strategy forming behind his eyes. Harrison tapped the screen and pressed the speakerphone button, tossing the device onto the center of the desk. Harrison, a booming, gravelly voice, echoed through the vast office. It was Richard Cole, chairman of Cole Global, and his father. Yes, Dad. Harrison kept his voice perfectly level, never once breaking eye contact with me. I am calling to ensure you are wearing a suit and not buried in spreadsheets, Richard barked. The reservation at Le Bernardin is for 8 o'clock. You are meeting Madeline tonight. She is a perfectly suitable match, Harrison. The board is breathing down my neck about your lack of stability. We are a traditional company. Investors want a settled executive with a wife, not a lone wolf. You will go to this blind date and you will be charming. I watched Harrison process his father's lecture. He did not roll his eyes or sigh. Instead, the corners of his mouth turned upward into a sharp, predatory smile. He leaned closer to the phone, his eyes locked dead onto mine. Dad, cancel my blind date, Harrison said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. I found your daughter-in-law today. A stunned silence radiated from the speakerphone. Even I felt my breath hitch in my throat. I masked my shock, instantly maintaining a neutral, unbothered expression. Excuse me, Richard sputtered, his booming voice losing its rhythm. What did you just say? Who is she? She is the woman who is going to hand us the entire logistics market on a silver platter, Harrison replied smoothly. I will bring her to Sunday dinner. Have the chef prepare something exceptional. Good night, Dad. Harrison ended the call before his father could formulate another question. He pushed the phone aside, giving me his full attention. I did not panic. I simply raised an eyebrow. I came here to negotiate a hostile takeover, Mr. Cole. I did not realize marriage was on the agenda. Harrison let out a short, genuine laugh. It is not marriage, Allison. It is a mutually beneficial corporate acquisition. You want to destroy Bradley and take everything he built using your brain. I want to absorb Apex Logistics and get my traditional marriage-obsessed board of directors off my back. My father believes a chief executive must have a wife to project stability. The shareholders echo that outdated sentiment. I refuse to marry a fragile socialite who knows nothing about my industry just to appease them. He stood up, walking around the massive desk to lean against the edge, crossing his arms. He was close enough now that I could see the absolute conviction in his eyes. Here is my offer, Harrison stated, his tone shifting into pure business. You walk out of this office as the new chief operating officer of Cole Global. You get a corner office, a seven-figure base salary, and full executive authority over our domestic expansion. In exchange, you wear my ring. You act as my fiancé at industry galas, board meetings, and family dinners. You give my father the illusion of stability he desperately craves, keeping the board completely off my back. I process the terms instantly. And what exactly do I get for playing the role of your devoted future wife? You get the keys to my armory, Harrison promised, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You get unlimited legal and financial resources. I will give you a blank check to fund the most aggressive corporate sabotage campaign this city has ever seen. We will drain Bradley of his clients, trap him in endless legal battles, and choke his supply lines until Apex begs for bankruptcy. You get absolute unchecked revenge, and I get to absorb his market share for pennies on the dollar. It was a masterful proposal. Harrison needed a shield against his board. I needed a sword to sever Bradley's remaining lifelines. We were two ruthless strategists, recognizing the perfect synergy. Bradley had fired me because I did not possess wife material energy. He fired me because I was too intimidating. Now that exact intimidating energy was going to make me the most powerful fake bride in corporate history. I stood up, matching his commanding presence. I do not do soft, Harrison. I will not pretend to be a submissive partner. If I wear your ring, I do it as an equal. We run this empire together, and when we burn Apex to the ground, I want to strike the final match. Harrison smiled. It was the smile of a man who found his equal. I would not expect anything less from my future wife. He turned around, picked up a sleek leather folder from his desk, and withdrew a standard executive employment contract. He grabbed a heavy gold pen, crossed out the title of Senior Vice President, and wrote Chief Operating Officer in black ink. He handed the pen to me. I took it. I never hesitated. I skipped the fine print. I knew exactly what I was signing away, and I knew exactly what I was gaining. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a sharp, aggressive flourish. "Welcome to Cole Global," Allison Harrison said, taking the contract back. "Let us go ruin your ex-boyfriend's life." I left the towering glass monolith of Cole Global with a signed executive contract in my briefcase and a phantom diamond ring on my finger. The Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets slick and highly reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. My phone remained silent in my purse. I had blocked Bradley on every platform the moment I stepped into the elevator. He no doubt expected me to spend the evening drowning my sorrows in cheap wine and deep despair. Instead, I hailed a black car and directed the driver to a quiet, affluent neighborhood across the water. I needed a war council. I needed people who understood unwavering loyalty and possessed the kind of ruthless intelligence required to execute my new mandate. I needed my sister Rachel and her husband Jamal. Rachel and Jamal lived in a beautiful modern craftsman home that radiated genuine warmth, a stark contrast to the sterile, intimidating penthouse I had just left. Rachel was a highly respected pediatric surgeon, fiercely protective and sharp as a tack. Jamal was an African-American forensic accountant and a rising junior partner at one of the top financial auditing firms in the entire country. He spent his days dismantling complex white-collar criminal operations, tracing laundered money through convoluted offshore accounts, and testifying as an expert witness in federal court. He had a mind like a steel trap and a zero-tolerance policy for corporate incompetence. I walked up the long driveway and let myself in using the spare key they gave me years ago. The rich smell of roasted garlic and fresh rosemary hit me instantly. Rachel was in the kitchen pulling a heavy cast-iron pan of vegetables from the oven, while Jamal stood at the massive marble island reviewing a stack of heavily redacted financial documents with a red pen in hand. He looked up, adjusting his glasses, and immediately noticed my rigid posture. "You are early," Jamal stated, his sharp eyes scanning my face with analytical precision. "And you are wearing your negotiation armor. Who did we kill today?" I set my leather tote bag onto one of the leather bar stools. "I was fired 2 hours ago," I said, my voice perfectly steady. Rachel dropped the oven mitts onto the counter with a loud thud. She spun around, her eyes wide with absolute shock. "Bradley fired you, the man whose company you literally built from scratch." I nodded, accepting the glass of cold water. Jamal silently slid across the island toward me. "He fired me in front of 300 industry professionals at the anniversary gala. He announced that I was too aggressive and lacked the soft, family-oriented energy the board wanted for our next funding round. Then he gave my title and my job to Savannah." Jamal froze. The red pen in his hand stopped mid-air. He slowly placed it down on the polished marble, his expression shifting from casual welcome to absolute terrifying focus. "Savannah." He repeated the name like it was a highly infectious disease, the same Savannah who dumped him 8 years ago and vanished until last month. He handed the chief strategy officer position to a woman with absolutely no corporate background. "Yes," I replied, taking a slow sip of water. She handed me a cardboard box and told me to leave my keycard. Rachel looked furious. Her hands curled into tight fists. "I am going to drive down to his penthouse and break his nose. I am going to ruin him." "You do not need to do that, Rachel," I said smoothly. "I already handled it." Jamal leaned forward against the marble island. He did not offer any empty pity. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew me too well for that. He knew I operated on strategy, not emotion. "What did you do, Allison?" "I went across town to Cole Global." I explained, watching their reactions carefully. "I bypassed human resources and pitched a hostile takeover strategy directly to Harrison Cole. I am now the chief operating officer of Cole Global. Oh, and I am also his fake fiancé. It was part of the negotiation to get his traditional board of directors off his back. In exchange, he gave me a blank check to completely destroy Apex Logistics." Rachel stared at me, her mouth slightly open. "You got fired? walked into the biggest competitor in the state, became their COO, and got engaged to a billionaire CEO all in the span of 3 hours. I am very efficient under pressure, I replied with a cold, calculated smile. Jamal threw his head back and let out a deep, booming laugh that filled the kitchen. It was the laugh of a man who fully appreciated the execution of a flawless tactical pivot. He clapped his hands together, his mind already racing ahead to the financial implications of my new alliance. Bradley just signed his own death warrant, Jamal said, a dangerous grin spreading across his face. He let his fragile ego blind him, and he just handed his entire playbook to his absolute biggest predator. We will make sure he pays for every single mistake. We moved the conversation to the dining table. Over dinner, I laid out the exact details of Harrison Cole's proposal. I explained the timeline we were working with and the vast legal resources I now had at my disposal. I told them about the upcoming venture capital round Bradley was desperately trying to secure. I needed to know exactly how much cash Apex had on hand and where their weak points were hidden. I knew the operational side flawlessly, but Jamal possessed the forensic expertise to tear their ledgers apart. Jamal pushed his plate aside. He did not need to finish his meal. The prospect of dismantling a fraudulent corporate structure was far more appetizing to him. He stood up from the dining table and walked over to his briefcase. He pulled out a heavy-duty encrypted laptop, the one he used specifically for deep-dive federal audits. He set it down on the dining table right next to my empty wine glass and opened the lid. The screen cast a blue glow over his focused, determined face. His fingers danced across the keyboard as he bypassed standard security walls and accessed a specialized financial database, securing the connection with expert precision. Bradley just gave a C-level title to a woman with zero corporate experience, Jamal says. Let us look at the SEC filings and public disclosures for Apex before your access was cut. Crooks always leave a paper trail. The screen of Jamal's laptop reflected in his glasses as lines of dense financial data scrolled past at blinding speed. He bypassed the standard consumer-facing reports and tapped directly into the raw, unedited quarterly filings Apex had submitted to their regulatory bodies just days prior. Rachel moved behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder, her eyes tracking the numbers, even though corporate finance was a foreign language to a pediatric surgeon. I sat completely still, sipping my water, letting the forensic accountant do what he did best. The kitchen was silent, except for the rapid, rhythmic clicking of the keyboard. Within 10 minutes, Jamal isolated the primary expenditure accounts. He brought up a comparative analysis graph, placing the last 4 quarters side by side. He zoomed in on the current quarter, specifically the operating expenses section. He tapped his finger against the screen, highlighting a sudden violent spike in cash outflow. "Here is your first red flag," Jamal stated, his voice clinical and detached. "Apex has always maintained a tight margin on operational costs. You ran a lean ship, Allison. But look at this. In the last 48 hours, Bradley has authorized a massive surge in outbound cash. He categorized it under consulting and research and development. It is a classic dumping ground for executives trying to hide rapid capital movement." I leaned forward, my strategic mind instantly engaging with the data. "I never authorized any external research and development initiatives," I said sharply. "Apex does not use outside consultants. I built the logistics algorithm in-house specifically to avoid those exact contracting fees." "How much money did he move?" Jamal ran a quick sum function. $3.5 million. He authorized the transfer late last night, barely 12 hours before he fired you on that stage. He drained almost 20% of your liquid venture capital reserves in a single stroke. Rachel gasped, pulling her hand back from Jamal's shoulder. "That is outright theft. He is bleeding his own company dry right before a major funding round. Why would he do that?" "Because he thinks he is untouchable," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He thinks my departure covers his tracks." "Where did the money go, Jamal?" "Follow the wire." Jamal cracked his knuckles and dove deeper into the digital labyrinth. He pulled up the routing numbers associated with the outbound transfers. He cross-referenced the recipient accounts against a federal database of registered corporate entities. The search engine took a few seconds to process the complex web of shell companies and blind trusts, designed to obscure the final destination of the funds. Then a single newly formed limited liability company popped up on the screen. The money was funneled into an entity called Horizon Strategic Ventures LLC, Jamal read aloud. It was incorporated in Nevada exactly 14 days ago. That timeline is not a coincidence, Allison. That is exactly when you said Savannah miraculously reappeared in his life. My blood turned to ice, and then immediately boiled over into pure concentrated fury. Pull the incorporation documents I commanded, find the registered agent, find the managing director. I want a name. Jamal bypassed the standard state registry walls, utilizing his high-clearance auditing credentials to pull the unredacted corporate filings. A PDF document materialized on the screen. He scrolled down to the signature line at the bottom of the last page. He did not say a word. He simply turned the heavy laptop around so I could see it for myself. The managing director and sole proprietor of Horizon Strategic Ventures LLC was Savannah. She is not here for love, I stated, staring at her signature. A cold, predatory realization washed over me. She did not come back because Bradley is her soulmate. She came back because Bradley is an easy mark with a $50 million valuation. She is embezzling venture capital funds right under his arrogant, oblivious nose. Jamal was already typing again, his forensic instincts fully ignited. If she set up an LLC in Nevada to hide $3.5 million, she is running from something massive. Let me run a background check on her civil and financial history in Las Vegas. The kitchen fell into a tense, heavy silence as the background check compiled. When the results finally populated, they painted a picture of absolute financial devastation. Savannah was not a sweet, supportive partner looking to build a corporate empire. She was a professional grifter drowning in catastrophic debt. Jamal shook his head in disbelief as he read through the court filings. She has multiple civil judgments against her in Clark County, Nevada. Massive unsecured gambling debts from 3 different high-roller casinos on the Las Vegas Strip. They filed liens against her remaining assets last month. She owes the Bellagio alone over $2 million. She was facing total financial ruin, possibly even criminal fraud charges if the casinos pushed the issue. She needed a bailout, Rachel concluded, her voice thick with disgust. She saw the news articles about Apex Logistics booming under your leadership, Allison. She realized the loser she dumped 8 years ago was suddenly sitting on a gold mine. She came back, played the devoted first love, and convinced him to hand her the keys to the vault. And Bradley was stupid enough to do it, I said, a dark, victorious smile spreading across my face. He was so desperate to feel like the dominant, powerful man in the relationship, something he could never feel around me, that he handed his company over to a parasite. He gave a C-level executive title and direct access to investor funds to a woman using his startup as a personal piggy bank to pay off casino enforcers. This is wire fraud, embezzlement, and a massive breach of fiduciary duty, Jamal said, closing the background check window. I can package this data right now. We can send it to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Venture Capital Board, and the federal authorities by midnight. We can have both of them in handcuffs before breakfast. No, I said sharply. The word hung in the air, halting Jamal's hands over the keyboard. Rachel stared at me in confusion. What do you mean, no? You have the smoking gun, Allison. You can destroy them tonight. I stood up from the bar stool and walked around the marble island. I placed my hand firmly on the closed lid of Jamal's laptop. We do not strike yet. If we turn them in now, Bradley plays the victim. He claims he was manipulated by a con artist and begs the board for mercy. The board fires Savannah, but they might keep Bradley to maintain a facade of stability for the investors. I do not want Bradley to survive this. I want him entirely eradicated from the industry. I looked at Jamal, my eyes locked onto his with absolute unwavering resolve. Secure the data, encrypt the files, and lock them in your safest offline drive. Keep it absolutely quiet. We do not breathe a word of this to anyone, not even to Harrison Cole, until the timing is flawless. Jamal smiled, recognizing the lethal nature of my strategy. You are going to let him keep digging. Exactly, I replied. Savannah will not stop at 3.5 million. Greed is a disease and she is infected. She will keep draining the company accounts to fund her lifestyle and cover her tracks. Meanwhile, Bradley is going to be so distracted, trying to fight the aggressive corporate war I am about to launch from Coal Global, that he will never notice his own ship is taking on water from the inside. We let Bradley dig his own grave. And when he is standing at the very bottom, looking up at us, that is when we bury him. The fallout at Apex Logistics was instantaneous and brutal. My departure did not just leave an empty chair in the executive suite. It ripped the operational spine right out of the company. I had built the routing algorithms to require constant high-level strategic calibration. Without my daily adjustments to the predictive models, the system began to choke within 48 hours. Freight bottlenecks that I used to resolve before breakfast were now piling up into catastrophic delays. Trucks sat idle in staging yards across the Midwest. Drivers timed out on their federal service hours waiting for dispatch coordinates that never came. The loading docks turned into a chaotic gridlock of misplaced inventory and furious warehouse managers. Major clients, the ones I had personally cultivated and reassured over years of meticulous service, immediately sensed the shift. The first to pull the alarm was a multinational retail conglomerate. They missed a critical delivery window for a seasonal product launch. When their supply chain director called Apex for an urgent explanation, he was not transferred to a seasoned strategist who could instantly deploy a contingency plan. He was transferred to Savannah. Savannah possessed absolutely zero understanding of supply chain logistics, crisis management, or corporate accountability. Instead of addressing the cascading failures in the routing software, she was busy exercising her new executive authority on extreme vanity projects. According to the internal tracking data Jamal continued to quietly monitor from his encrypted server, Savannah authorized a complete luxury renovation of my former office. She ordered custom Italian marble flooring, imported velvet drapes, and a $75,000 desk crafted from reclaimed redwood. She spent her crucial first days selecting high-end fabric swatches and ordering artisan espresso machines for the executive lounge, while the operational dashboard flashed red with critical system errors. Bradley, blinded by his own arrogance and desperate to validate his decision, refused to see the impending collapse. He covered for her blatant incompetence, taking angry client calls himself and offering empty promises about temporary restructuring hiccups. But venture capitalists do not care about restructuring hiccups. They care about service-level agreements and profit margins, both of which were currently in freefall at Apex. The board of directors started demanding immediate answers, and Bradley was rapidly running out of excuses. His golden child, the woman who was supposed to bring a softer familial energy to the company, was bleeding them dry on aesthetic upgrades and offshore wire transfers, while the core business suffocated under its own weight. Meanwhile, from my new corner office at Coal Global, I orchestrated a masterpiece of corporate acquisition. Harrison and I operated with a terrifying unspoken synergy. We did not need to actively poach Apex clients. We simply positioned Coal Global as the only viable lifeline when Apex inevitably dropped the ball. As Bradley failed to meet his shipping quotas, panicked distributors scrambled for reliable alternatives. I had already instructed the Coal Global sales teams to have aggressive contingency contracts drafted and ready to sign. We absorbed 3 of Apex's largest accounts in a single afternoon. We offered them stability, superior pricing, and the undeniable guarantee of my operational oversight. The market responded instantly. Coal Global stock ticked upward, while whispers of Apex internal disaster began to circulate through the industry publications. By day 5, the pressure inside Apex reached a critical mass. Bradley could no longer hide behind his fragile ego. The reality of his catastrophic mistake was staring him in the face, manifesting in millions of dollars of lost revenue and a mutinous board of directors preparing to ask very difficult questions. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the massive fire he had started with his own 2 hands. My office phone rang late on a Thursday afternoon. The caller ID displayed Bradley's private cell number. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the moment before I pressed the speakerphone button and leaned back in my heavy leather chair. Harrison, who had been reviewing expansion documents at the massive glass conference table in my office, paused and looked up. His eyes locked onto the flashing red light of the phone. I answered with a crisp, professional tone. Allison speaking. You unhinged, vindictive thief! Bradley snarled through the speaker. His voice was raw, stripped of the polished, charismatic charm he usually projected. He sounded panicked, erratic, and pushed to the absolute brink of a nervous breakdown. I remained perfectly still, my expression betraying zero emotion. I highly recommend you watch your tone, Bradley. You are calling a direct competitor on a recorded corporate line. What exactly can Cole Global do for you today? Do not play games with me, Allison. He shouted, the sound of his heavy, ragged breathing echoing through the pristine office. I know exactly what you are doing. You sabotaged the routing algorithms before you left. You locked us out of the predictive models. And now you are stealing my clients. I just lost the Midwest retail contract. They walked away from a multi-year deal and signed with Cole Global an hour ago. I picked up a gold pen, turning it slowly between my fingers. I did not sabotage anything, Bradley. The algorithms require a brilliant strategist to run them. You fired the strategist. As for the predictive models, you never owned them. I patented that architecture under my name 3 years ago. You were simply operating on a license I allowed you to use. That license expired the moment you handed me a cardboard box. I will sue you into oblivion. Bradley threatened, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. I am filing an injunction tomorrow morning. I am taking you to federal court for corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and violating your non-compete agreement. You stole my data, Allison. You stole my clients to impress your new boss. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. Harrison leaned back in his chair, a slow, dark smile spreading across his face as he listened to his rival actively self-destruct. He crossed his arms immensely, enjoying the show. I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. I did not steal your clients, Bradley. They just realized the wizard left the building, and they are staring at the clown. I pressed the end call button and placed the phone face down on my desk. Harrison Cole did not say a single word, but the profound satisfaction radiating from his posture was palpable. The trap was perfectly set. The bait was taken. Bradley was officially spiraling into a frantic, paranoid frenzy. We simply had to wait for him to make his next public misstep. We did not wait long. 3 days later, the battlefield shifted from the high-rise boardrooms of Seattle to the opulent grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. It was the annual Global Supply Chain and Logistics Charity Gala, the single most critical networking event of the fiscal year. Every major venture capitalist, angel investor, and titan of industry gathered under the glittering crystal chandeliers to write massive tax-deductible checks and scout for their next highly profitable acquisition. For Cole Global, this evening was a victory lap. For Apex Logistics, it was a desperate, gasping plea for corporate life support. Harrison had arranged for his private corporate jet to fly us into New York that morning. The engagement ring he had placed on my finger earlier that week, a flawless emerald-cut diamond that commanded immediate respect, felt less like a romantic prop and more like a lethal warning label to anyone who dared to cross us. We stepped out of a sleek black town car and onto the velvet red carpet. I did not wear the standard muted corporate attire favored by conservative executives. I chose a floor-length midnight blue velvet gown with a razor-sharp silhouette. It was a dress designed to draw every single eye in the room and hold them hostage. Harrison wore a bespoke obsidian tuxedo that mirrored the dark, predatory energy he carried so effortlessly. When he offered me his arm, I looped mine through it, and we walked into the grand ballroom as the undisputed king and queen of the industry. The power dynamic in the room shifted the absolute second we crossed the threshold. Conversations halted. Heads turned in our direction. The quiet, polite murmur of high society networking was instantly replaced by a wave of frantic electric whispers. Everyone knew Cole Global had absorbed Apex's largest accounts, but seeing us together was the physical manifestation of a hostile takeover. I scanned the massive room with practiced ease, my eyes cutting through the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses. It took me less than a minute to locate our primary targets. Bradley and Savannah were standing near the sweeping marble staircase, looking exactly like the captains of a sinking ship trying to sell premium tickets to the last remaining lifeboats. Bradley was sweating visibly under the bright lights. his posture tense and aggressively desperate as he cornered a prominent venture capitalist from a major New York investment firm. He was gesticulating wildly, pitching the absolute lie that Apex was experiencing a temporary operational pivot rather than a total structural collapse. Savannah stood right beside him, clutching a delicate glass of champagne. She wore a shimmering silver gown that looked entirely too expensive for a company currently missing regional payroll. But the confident, smug facade she had worn on the stage in Seattle was completely gone. She looked incredibly nervous, her eyes darting anxiously around the crowded room, hunting for easier marks to swindle. The venture capitalist, Bradley was cornering, looked over Bradley's shoulder, his eyes widening dramatically as he spotted Harrison and me. Without a single word of apology, the investor simply turned his back on Bradley mid-pitch and walked directly toward us, his hand extended with an eager, fawning smile. Bradley froze in place. He slowly turned around, following the investor's path, and his eyes locked onto mine across the ballroom. The color completely drained from his face. He looked at my designer gown, then at the heavy diamond ring catching the light on my left hand, and finally up to the towering, imposing figure of Harrison Cole standing firmly by my side. I offered Bradley a slow, patronizing smile. He looked like he wanted to scream, but the presence of 300 potential investors forced him to swallow his boiling rage. He grabbed Savannah's arm roughly and whispered something urgent in her ear. I turned my attention back to the investors flocking around Harrison, playing the role of the brilliant, charming fiancé flawlessly. We navigated the room, shaking hands, securing verbal commitments, and quietly cementing the narrative that Cole Global was the only stable, lucrative investment left in the market today. Half an hour later, Harrison and I were standing near the towering champagne fountain. I was holding a crystal flute discussing a complex European distribution network with a Swiss shipping magnate. As the magnate excused himself to greet a passing colleague, a cloying, overly sweet scent of synthetic perfume suddenly invaded my personal space. Savannah materialized out of the crowded room. She had left Bradley sweating alone at the bar and decided to attempt a tactical strike of her own. She completely ignored my presence, stepping entirely too close to Harrison. She tilted her head, batting her eyelashes, and deployed the helpless, fragile persona she routinely used to manipulate weak, insecure men. Mr. Cole, Savannah purred, her voice a sickly sweet whisper designed to sound intimate and exclusive. I am so glad I finally caught you alone for a brief moment. Harrison did not take a single step back, but his posture grew incredibly rigid. He looked down at her with an expression of profound, chilling boredom. We are not alone, Ms. Savannah. My fiancé is standing right here. Savannah offered a tight, fake smile in my direction before immediately turning her focus back to Harrison. She leaned closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial hush. She placed one manicured hand directly on her bare chest, playing the deeply concerned, altruistic victim. Mr. Cole, be careful. Allison is a bitter, scorned woman who tries to sabotage companies out of jealousy. Harrison did not recoil. He did not blink. He simply looked down at Savannah with an expression of absolute clinical disgust. The kind of look a scientist might give a particularly repulsive insect under a microscope. He did not lower his voice to match her conspiratorial whisper. Instead, he projected his words with perfect diction, ensuring that the ring of venture capitalists and industry titans standing within a 10-foot radius could hear every single syllable. Ms. Savannah, that Dior dress costs $15,000. Harrison stated, his voice ringing out like the judge delivering a death sentence. Impressive for a newly appointed executive of a startup that missed its quarterly earnings by 30%. I will trust the scorned woman who generated $50 million in revenue over a parasite draining it. The impact of his words was immediate and devastating. It was a tactical nuclear strike delivered in the middle of a high society ballroom. Savannah physically stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The smug, manipulative facade she had worn seconds prior completely evaporated, replaced by raw, naked panic. She looked down at her silver gown as if it had suddenly caught fire. The silence that radiated outward from our position was deafening. The surrounding venture capitalists, the very people Bradley and Savannah were desperately trying to court, had heard everything. In the corporate world, numbers are the only language that matters. Harrison had just publicly broadcasted Apex Logistics' exact financial hemorrhage. He had directly connected their massive sudden revenue loss to the exorbitant unjustified spending of the woman standing right in front of them. I watched the investors process the data in real time. Their eyes darted from Savannah's $15,000 haute couture gown to the frantic, sweating figure of Bradley across the room. The math was simple and it was entirely unforgivable. Apex was not pivoting. Apex was bleeding out to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. Savannah tried to recover her hands, trembling as she clutched her champagne flute. Mr. Cole, you misunderstand. Bradley authorized those funds for public relations. We are rebranding the corporate image. Harrison did not even grace her with a response. He simply turned his body slightly, positioning himself between Savannah and me, a silent, immovable barrier of wealth and power. Across the room, Bradley finally realized what was happening. He saw something under Harrison's commanding presence, and his fragile, inflated ego snapped entirely. He abandoned the remaining investor he had been attempting to corner and charged across the crowded ballroom. He shoved past a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, nearly knocking the man over his face, flushed an ugly, volatile shade of crimson. "Hey!" Bradley shouted, abandoning all professional decorum. His voice cracked with rage, drawing the attention of the remaining guests, who had not already tuned into the spectacle. "Step away from my fiancé right now, Cole." Bradley lunged into our immediate circle, pointing a shaking finger directly at Harrison's chest. I was breathing heavily, his suit jacket unbuttoned and rumpled, radiating the frantic energy of a man completely out of his depth. "You think you can just stand here and insult my executive team? You think you can steal my chief strategy officer and then talk down to the woman replacing her?" Harrison remained as motionless as a marble statue. He did not raise his hands to defend himself. He did not need to. Before Bradley could take another aggressive step forward, two massive security guards in dark suits materialized from the shadows of the ballroom pillars. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. One guard smoothly stepped directly between Harrison and Bradley, pressing a firm, unyielding hand against Bradley's chest, halting his momentum instantly. The second guard flanked Savannah, signaling that the confrontation was officially over. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice and step back." The lead security guard instructed his tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "You are causing a disturbance. I am the CEO of Apex Logistics." Bradley spat, struggling vainly against the guard's grip. "You cannot touch me. Tell this arrogant vulture to back off." Harrison calmly adjusted his cuffs, his eyes fixed on Bradley with an expression of profound pity. "A real CEO does not lose his temper in front of his shareholders, Bradley. A real CEO does not fund his girlfriend's gambling habits with venture capital money. You are making a scene and you are embarrassing yourself." The absolute lack of emotional control from Bradley was the final nail in the coffin. Industry elites operate on stability, foresight, and rational decision-making. They were currently witnessing the founder of a $50 million company screaming like a petulant child while being restrained by hotel security. The contrast between Bradley's unhinged outburst and Harrison's icy, calculated composure was all the proof the market needed. I watched the venture capitalists nearby physically take a step backward, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. A prominent angel investor from Manhattan, a man Bradley had been desperately courting all evening, quietly pulled out his cell phone. He typed a rapid message, hitting send with a definitive tap. I knew exactly what that message said. He was instructing his legal team to immediately withdraw the term sheets for Apex Series B funding. The Whisper network ignited across the ballroom. The rumors of Apex internal disaster were no longer just whispers. They were verified public facts. The company was officially a massive liability. "We are leaving," Bradley snarled, finally realizing that every single investor in the room was staring at him with undisguised contempt. He grabbed Savannah's arm, roughly dragging her away from the security guards. "You are going to pay for this, Allison. I am going to bury you in court. I will make sure you lose every single dime you ever made." I stood perfectly still, my chin raised, offering him nothing but a cold, dismissive stare. "I look forward to reading your lawsuit, Bradley. Make sure you use a good lawyer. You are going to need one." Bradley dragged a humiliated, silent Savannah toward the exit, their departure watched by 300 of the most powerful people in the country. They walked out of the Plaza Hotel, not as industry disruptors, but as absolute pariahs. The doors swung shut behind them, sealing their fate. Harrison turned to me, offering his arm once again. The tension in the room began to dissipate as the string quartet smoothly transitioned into a new, upbeat melody, desperately trying to restore the elegant atmosphere. "You handled that beautifully," Harrison murmured, his voice pitched just for my ears as we walked toward the exit ourselves. "The market will open on Monday, and Apex will be entirely unfundable. He has nothing left but his fragile ego and his legal threats." I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the solid, reassuring strength of our alliance. "Let him sue me," I replied, a dark, victorious smile playing on my lips. "It is the final trap. When he files that paperwork, he will lock himself inside a burning building, and I have the only key to the exit." 72 hours later, Bradley filed a massive, highly publicized lawsuit against me in federal court, doing exactly what I had predicted. He accused me of corporate espionage and violating my executive non-compete agreement. He claimed I weaponized insider knowledge to poach his clients and tank their valuation to benefit my new employer. He demanded exactly $50 million in damages, equating to the venture capital he lost at the Plaza Hotel. Bradley handed the public relations strategy over to Savannah, his second catastrophic mistake of the week. She fought dirty using the only currency she truly understood: gossip. Within 48 hours, a smear campaign flooded the digital space. Savannah utilized the remaining dregs of the marketing budget to pay off tech blogs. The headlines painted a picture of a scorned, unstable woman throwing a corporate tantrum. Silicon Valley Insider labeled me the unhinged ex-girlfriend of logistics. Another blog claimed I was escorted out by security after suffering a hysterical breakdown. They utilized carefully cropped photos from the gala, showing security guards standing near me, omitting that I walked away with my head held high. They wanted to provoke me into an angry, emotional statement. They wanted me to launch a counter-media campaign, dragging myself down into the mud with them, to make the situation look like a messy domestic dispute. I gave them absolutely nothing. I instituted a total media blackout. I ordered the public relations department to issue a single statement confirming my appointment and declining to comment on pending litigation. I did not post on social media. I did not engage with industry journalists. I went to work every single morning at 6, sat in my corner office, and systematically dismantled Bradley's remaining regional distribution networks. My silence was strategic. Every day that Bradley and Savannah spent obsessing over blog metrics and tracking my lack of response was a day they were not fixing their crumbling infrastructure. Furthermore, premium corporate litigation lawyers do not work for exposure. By launching a massive federal lawsuit, Bradley was racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in billable hours. He was draining his operational budget to fight a ghost, bleeding out cash that he desperately needed to keep his trucks on the road, while Bradley burned his remaining capital on slander. I sat in the soundproof conference room of the legal department. Harrison sat at the head of the long mahogany table, nursing a cup of black coffee. Next to him sat Donovan, the lead corporate litigator for Cole Global. Donovan was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who specialized in crushing frivolous lawsuits before they even reached a courtroom. Donovan spread the 70-page legal complaint across the table. "The foundation of his entire case rests on this non-compete clause," Donovan explained, tapping a manicured finger against a highlighted paragraph. "He claims you are legally barred from operating in the logistics sector within North America for a period of 24 months following your termination. If this contract is ironclad, the injunction could temporarily freeze your ability to restructure our Midwest routes." Harrison looked at me. His expression was completely relaxed. He knew I would not have pitched a hostile takeover if I was encumbered by a restrictive covenant. "What is the play, Allison?" I smiled, reaching into my leather briefcase. I pulled out a single pristine manila folder and slid it across the table toward Donovan. "Bradley is a narcissist," I stated calmly. "Narcissists are inherently lazy when it comes to administrative details because they believe the rules do not apply to them. 2 months ago, Apex Logistics underwent a structural audit to prepare for the funding round. The external auditors required all executives to sign updated employment contracts with heavily reinforced non-compete clauses." Donovan opened the folder and extracted the physical contract inside. I signed my copy immediately. I continued leaning back in my chair, but Bradley was distracted. That was the exact same week Savannah miraculously reappeared in his life. He was too busy taking long lunches and leaving the office early to impress his newly returned first love. I placed his updated contract on his desk 4 separate times. Every time he brushed it aside, claiming he would get to it later. He was the chief executive. He thought his signature was merely a formality. Donovan flipped to the final page of the document. He stopped. A slow, predatory grin spread across the lawyer's face. "He never signed it," Donovan whispered, tracing the empty signature line with his thumb. "He never signed it," I confirmed. The updated contract explicitly voided all previous employment agreements. By failing to sign the new document before terminating my employment, Bradley effectively rendered my non-compete clause completely null and void. I am a free agent. I can legally dismantle his company piece by piece, and there is absolutely nothing he can do to stop me. Harrison let out a low, appreciative laugh. He looked at Donovan. "How quickly can we get this in front of a federal judge?" "The preliminary injunction hearing is scheduled for Tuesday morning," Donovan replied, already packing the document into his secure briefcase. "Bradley will walk into that courtroom expecting a swift victory. We will let him present his entire argument. We will let him rack up the maximum amount of legal fees. And then we will drop this bomb directly on his head." I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. Bradley thought he was a master manipulator, but he forgot the cardinal rule of corporate warfare. You never declare war unless you know exactly what is in your arsenal. Bradley was charging into battle with an unloaded weapon, and I was about to hand him the ultimate humiliating defeat. The trap was primed, the stage was set, and the complete downfall of his company was now an absolute certainty. There would be no escape, no mercy, and absolutely no way for him to survive. Tuesday morning arrived with a heavy downpour washing the Seattle streets clean as we approached the federal courthouse. The towering architecture of the building was designed to intimidate, but as I walked up the marble steps flanked by Harrison and Donovan, I felt nothing but absolute anticipation. We bypassed the reporters gathered outside, ignoring their shouted questions fueled by Savannah's paid smear campaign. We entered the courtroom, a cavernous space of polished oak and solemn authority, and took our seats at the defense table. Bradley arrived 10 minutes later, deliberately attempting to make a grand entrance. He walked through the heavy wooden doors flanked by 3 expensive corporate litigators. Savannah trailed closely behind him, dressed in a muted gray designer suit, desperately trying to project the image of a serious, supportive business executive. Bradley looked incredibly smug. He adjusted his tie and shot a victorious, condescending smirk across the aisle toward me. I truly believed he was walking into an execution, entirely unaware that he was the one being led to the gallows. The federal judge, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance regarding courtroom theatrics, called the preliminary injunction hearing to order. She instructed Bradley's lead attorney to present their argument for freezing my employment at Cole Global. The opposing lawyer stood up and launched into a highly aggressive theatrical monologue. He painted me as a rogue executive, a disgruntled former partner who had stolen proprietary logistics data and defected to a rival corporation purely out of spite. He waved a thick binder of printed emails and routing schedules, claiming I was violating an ironclad non-compete agreement that barred me from the industry for 24 months. I demanded an immediate court order to halt my operations at Cole Global and requested $50 million in punitive damages. Bradley sat back in his chair, whispering something into Savannah's ear. She giggled softly, pressing her hand against his arm. They were practically planning how to spend the settlement money. When the opposing counsel finally concluded his fiery opening statement, the judge turned her attention to our table. She looked over her glasses at Donovan. "Counselor," she stated, her voice echoing in the large room, "your client is facing severe allegations of corporate espionage and breach of contract. What is your response to the request for an immediate injunction?" Donovan stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with infuriating calm. He did not bring a thick binder. He did not prepare a theatrical speech. He simply picked up the single manila folder I had given him days prior. "Your Honor." Donovan began, his voice smooth and commanding. We will not be presenting a defense against the allegations of violating the non-compete agreement today. A loud murmur erupted from Bradley's side of the room. Bradley actually chuckled aloud, assuming we were surrendering. Savannah beamed. Even the judge looked mildly surprised. "And why is that, counselor?" the judge asked, leaning forward. "Because, Your Honor, it is physically impossible for my client to violate a contract that does not legally exist." Donovan stepped out from behind our table and approached the bench. He handed the open manila folder to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. He then turned to face Bradley's team, who suddenly stopped smiling. Opposing counsel has based their entire $50 million lawsuit on an employment contract updated 2 months ago during Apex Logistics' internal structural audit, Donovan explained to the courtroom. According to Apex's own corporate bylaws drafted to satisfy their external auditors, the issuance of this new contract explicitly and immediately nullified all prior employment agreements my client had signed. Bradley's lead attorney jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor." The defendant accepted the terms of the new agreement. She continued to work under its stipulations. Donovan did not even look at the opposing lawyer. He kept his eyes locked on Bradley. "Did she?" "Your Honor, I direct your attention to the final page of the document submitted into evidence. You will see my client's signature dated and time-stamped perfectly. You will see the signature of the human resources witness. However, you will also notice a glaring omission." The judge flipped to the last page. She adjusted her glasses, her brow furrowing. She looked up and locked eyes with Bradley's legal team. The line for the chief executive officer's signature is completely blank. The color instantly drained from Bradley's face. The smugness shattered, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. He grabbed the copy of the contract sitting on his table and frantically flipped to the last page. He stared at the empty signature line as the catastrophic reality of his own incompetence crashed down on him. He remembered the exact week that contract had been placed on his desk. It was the week Savannah had walked back into his life. He remembered brushing the paperwork aside to take her out for long, expensive lunches, arrogant enough to believe administrative details were beneath him. "An unexecuted contract is a void contract," Donovan stated, delivering the killing blow. "Because Mr. Bradley failed to sign the governing document before terminating my client, the contract was never legally activated. Furthermore, because that unexecuted document actively voided her previous agreements. My client was terminated as an at-will employee, completely unencumbered by any restrictive covenants. She is a free agent. She has every legal right to work for Cole Global, to utilize her industry knowledge, and to aggressively compete against Apex Logistics." Bradley's lead attorney scrambled to find a defense, stammering about implied consent and verbal agreements, but the judge raised her hand, silencing him immediately. "In a corporate courtroom, at this echelon, verbal assumptions mean absolutely nothing," the judge declared, her tone sharp and unforgiving. "Ink on paper is the only truth that matters. Plaintiff, you have brought a $50 million lawsuit and requested a federal injunction based on a document your own client failed to sign. This is a staggering display of negligence." Bradley sank lower into his chair. Savannah pulled her hand away from his arm, inching away from him as if his failure was contagious. The judge slammed her gavel down. "The motion for an injunction is firmly denied. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, because the plaintiff filed this action based on a blatantly void document, forcing the defendant to retain elite corporate counsel to defend against baseless claims, I am ruling this litigation entirely frivolous. The plaintiff is hereby ordered to cover the entirety of the defendant's legal fees." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The judge had not just thrown out the case, she had just handed Bradley a legal bill that would easily run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. He had tried to bankrupt me, and instead he had just drained his own dwindling operational budget even further. Court is adjourned. Harrison stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked down at Bradley, who was staring blankly at the polished wooden table, completely paralyzed by the massive financial blow he had just sustained. Savannah was already whispering angrily at her lawyers, demanding to know how they missed the blank signature line. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my tailored suit. I walked past Bradley's table, pausing just long enough for him to look up at me. His eyes were wide with defeat and humiliation. I told you to use a good lawyer, Bradley, I said softly, my voice perfectly calm. Now write the check. We have a lot more work to do. I turned and walked out of the courtroom alongside Harrison and Donovan. We had completely dismantled his legal offensive in under 20 minutes, but this was only the first phase of the counterstrike. I had broken his shield. Now it was time to take his weapons. I was about to drop the intellectual property trap, and Apex Logistics would not survive the impact. We returned to the towering glass sanctuary of Coal Global with the taste of absolute victory fresh on our tongues. The rain had cleared, leaving the Seattle skyline sharp and brilliant against the afternoon sun. I walked into the main executive conference room alongside Harrison and Donovan. The massive digital display board at the end of the table was currently projecting the plunging stock metrics of Apex Logistics. Word of the disastrous court hearing had already leaked to the major financial networks. Bradley was bleeding credibility by the second, but a wounded animal is only truly defeated when you take away its ability to breathe. I set my briefcase on the polished mahogany table and opened it. I did not pull out financial records or employment contracts this time. I pulled out a heavy dark blue binder bearing the official seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I slid it across the smooth surface directly to Donovan. The defensive phase is officially over, I announced, taking a seat next to Harrison. It is time to go on the offensive. Donovan, I need you to issue an immediate cease and desist order to Apex Logistics. I also need you to send a legal notification to their primary cloud hosting providers. We are shutting down their entire routing network before the stock market closes today. Harrison leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. His dark eyes locked onto the blue binder. You are going after their core software, he stated, his voice a low hum of pure anticipation. Bradley claims that algorithm is the proprietary foundation of his entire enterprise. Bradley claims a lot of things, I replied with a cold, predatory smile. 3 years ago, Apex was on the verge of total bankruptcy. We could not afford to hire external developers to build the predictive routing engine. We desperately needed to secure our first major round of venture capital. I spent 8 months working every single weekend from my kitchen table, using my personal computer entirely off the company clock to code the architecture from scratch. I built the machine learning protocol that allows their freight network to bypass traffic gridlocks and optimize delivery windows. Donovan opened the binder, his eyes scanning the dense legal text of the patent registration. His eyebrows shot up. You patented the source code exclusively under your own name. Exactly, I confirmed. Because I coded it using my own hardware and on my own time before the current iteration of the corporate entity was officially formed. It was never legally classified as a work for hire. I am the sole inventor and the sole owner of the intellectual property. When Apex finally secured funding, Bradley assumed the company automatically owned the software. I let him believe that. But legally, I simply granted Apex a rolling, at-will commercial license to utilize the algorithm, a license that required my continuous employment to remain valid. Donovan let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. He looked at Harrison, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. She owns the actual brain of the company. Bradley fired the landlord and thought he got to keep the building. By terminating her employment and voiding her contract, he automatically revoked his own licensing rights to the software powering his entire fleet. Draft the order, Harrison commanded, his voice vibrating with lethal authority. I want it delivered to their headquarters by private courier within the hour. Send the secondary notices to their server hosts. Inform them that hosting stolen intellectual property makes them liable for federal copyright infringement. Donovan did not waste a single second. He pulled his laptop from his bag and began typing furiously. The legal mechanism was straightforward and utterly devastating. A cease and desist order regarding stolen intellectual property requires the immediate suspension of the infringing technology. Without the algorithm, Apex Logistics was not a tech company anymore. They were just a collection of confused truck drivers sitting in empty parking lots. 45 minutes later, the courier confirmed delivery at the front desk of Apex headquarters. Simultaneously, Donovan executed the digital transmission to the server hosts. I walked over to the massive digital display board and pulled up a live monitoring feed of the regional freight grid. For a moment, nothing happened. The map was covered in thousands of tiny green dots representing the active Apex delivery fleet moving across the North American supply chain. Then the server hosts complied with the legal threat. It happened like a wave of sudden catastrophic darkness. The green dots began turning red. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The predictive routing engine went completely offline. The automated dispatch systems disconnected. The live tracking feeds froze. The entire logistical nervous system of Apex suffered a total fatal stroke. My cell phone lit up on the conference table. The caller ID flashed Bradley's name. I did not block him this time. I wanted to hear the exact moment his reality shattered. I tapped the speakerphone button. "Allison, what did you just do?" Bradley screamed through the speaker. His voice was no longer arrogant or angry. It was raw with pure, unfiltered terror. "The entire network just crashed. The servers are locking us out. The hosting company is saying we are violating federal copyright laws. Fix it right now." I leaned down toward the microphone, my voice steady, cold, and completely devoid of mercy. "I cannot fix a system you no longer have the rights to use, Bradley. I own the algorithm. You fired the license holder. Therefore, you are currently running thousands of commercial vehicles on pirated software." "That is impossible," he stammered, the sound of utter panic echoing through the line. "We paid for that development. It belongs to Apex." "Check your patent registry," I suggested sharply. "You will find my name and only my name. You wanted to give a chief strategy officer title to a woman with zero experience. Let us see Savannah manually route 3,000 freight trucks using a paper map and a calculator. Your company is paralyzed, Bradley. The cease and desist is permanent." I ended the call, severing the connection before he could utter another desperate word. I looked at Harrison, who was watching the red dots multiply across the screen with an expression of profound satisfaction. Apex was bleeding out, their operational heart stopped dead in its tracks. The intellectual property trap had snapped shut, breaking their legs. The hostile takeover was no longer a possibility. It was now an absolute inevitability. "We have completely paralyzed them," I said, turning away from the screen. "Now we prepare the financial strike. It is time to buy the ashes." The financial markets reacted to the sudden paralysis of Apex Logistics with brutal efficiency. By the time the opening bell rang on Wall Street the following morning, the Whisper network had evolved into a full-blown panic. Venture capitalists do not wait for explanations when their money is burning. They demand immediate extraction. The massive Series B funding round that Bradley had been banking on evaporated into thin air, leaving him completely exposed and vulnerable to the financial wolves. Major investment firms pulled their term sheets, issuing public statements, distancing themselves from the catastrophic operational failure. Apex stock valuation, which had been artificially inflated by my previous strategies, plummeted in a terrifying vertical drop. Within 48 hours, the company was trading at fractions of a penny. Bradley tried to stop the bleeding. He scheduled emergency conference calls with the board of directors and the remaining angel investors. He offered them frantic promises about building a new routing algorithm from scratch. He begged for a grace period. But building a machine learning protocol takes months of rigorous coding and millions of dollars in development capital. Two things Bradley completely lacked. His creditors realized that without my software, Apex was essentially a graveyard of leased trucks and empty warehouses. The banks began calling in their loans, demanding immediate repayment of the massive lines of credit Bradley had leveraged to fund his rapid expansion. Apex was insolvent. The ship was not just sinking, it was already at the bottom of the ocean. From the pristine environment of my office at Cole Global Harrison, and I watched the carnage unfold on the financial monitors. We did not celebrate with champagne. We operated with the cold, surgical precision of corporate predators, executing a flawless kill. Harrison mobilized his acquisitions team, instructing them to deploy a network of anonymous third-party proxy firms. We systematically targeted the institutional lenders who held the paper on Bradley's most critical infrastructure. We did not want Bradley's board to know that Cole Global was the entity circling their carcass. If they knew it was us, pride might force them into a protracted legal bankruptcy just to spite me. Instead, we weaponized their desperation. The proxy firms approached Apex primary creditors, the major commercial banks that were currently panicking over their exposed loan portfolios. We offered them a quick, quiet exit. We purchased Apex outstanding corporate debt for pennies on the dollar. The banks, eager to wipe a toxic liability off their balance sheets before the quarter ended, quickly signed over the promissory notes. They had no idea they were selling the chains that would bind Bradley directly to me. Harrison stood by the panoramic window reviewing the incoming confirmation emails on his tablet. He looked over his shoulder, his dark eyes reflecting the predatory triumph we both shared. The final debt acquisition just cleared, Harrison announced, his voice smooth and commanding. Cole Global is now officially the majority debt holder of Apex Logistics. We own their warehouse leases. We own the financing on their vehicle fleet. If Bradley defaults on a single payment, we have the legal right to seize the entire corporate structure and liquidate his remaining assets. I nodded, pulling up the debt schedules on my own monitor. He will default by Friday, I stated confidently. His operational revenue is zero. His cash reserves are draining rapidly. And thanks to my brilliant replacement, his remaining capital is currently being funneled straight into a black hole. Across the city, inside the heavily mortgaged walls of Apex headquarters, panic had fully consumed the executive suite. Savannah sat at the $75,000 desk she had bought with company funds, staring at her computer screen in absolute terror. The illusion of her glamorous corporate life had shattered. The phones were ringing incessantly with angry creditors and furious clients demanding refunds. Bradley was locked inside the boardroom, screaming at his lawyers, completely useless to her now. Savannah realized the truth. The company was dead, and her easy source of income had evaporated. She was a survivor of her own toxic making, and she recognized that Bradley was no longer a golden ticket. He was a sinking anchor. But she also knew that the massive gambling debts she owed to the Las Vegas casinos had not vanished. The enforcers she had been trying to pay off would not care about a software patent dispute. They wanted their money, and they would come looking for her to get it. Desperation breeds reckless behavior. Savannah made her final fatal miscalculation. She decided to abandon ship, but she refused to leave empty-handed. She opened the executive banking portal, utilizing the high-level security clearances Bradley had foolishly granted her. She accessed the last remaining pool of liquid cash Apex held in reserve, the emergency payroll fund. She did not know that every single digital footprint she made was being monitored. Miles away in the secure confines of his forensic accounting firm, my brother-in-law, Jamal, sat in a darkened office. His encrypted laptop screen glowed with real-time tracking software. He had embedded a silent monitoring protocol into the Apex financial network days ago, anticipating this exact scenario. My cell phone buzzed. I answered it immediately, putting Jamal on speakerphone so Harrison could hear. "The rat is making a run for it," Jamal stated, his voice tight with intense focus. "Savannah just initiated a massive wire transfer. She is trying to move $4 million out of the Apex payroll accounts." "Where is she sending it?" I asked, leaning closer to the phone. "She is routing it through a complex web of shell companies," Jamal replied, the sound of his rapid typing echoing through the speaker. "She is bouncing the funds through dummy accounts in Delaware and Nevada, trying to wash the origin point. But she is panicking, and her execution is sloppy. She is making mistakes. I am tracking every single keystroke. The final destination is an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered under Horizon Strategic Ventures, LLC. She is attempting to move the stolen cash beyond federal jurisdiction before she boards a flight out of the country." Harrison crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "Can you freeze the transfer before it clears the international gateway?" "I can do better than that," Jamal said, a cold, satisfied edge to his voice. "I am contacting the federal banking authorities right now. I am providing them with the exact routing numbers, the destination accounts, and the unredacted digital signature Savannah used to authorize the theft. I am flagging the transaction under the international money laundering statutes. The federal agents will freeze the funds in transit, and they will immediately trigger an automatic wire fraud investigation." She just handed us the smoking gun. "Perfect," I commanded. "Lock the data and send the dossier to my private server." Bradley thinks his biggest problem is a software dispute. He has no idea his fiancée just committed a massive federal crime using his executive credentials. It is time to call a board meeting. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock the following afternoon. The atmosphere inside the corporate headquarters was funereal. I walked through the corridors with Harrison, our footsteps echoing against the polished floors. We did not stop at my old office. The heavy doors were open. The remaining Apex board members were seated, their faces pale and drawn. They were the venture capitalists who trusted my guidance and now faced financial ruin because of Bradley's arrogance. When Harrison and I walked into the room, their murmurs of panic instantly ceased. They recognized us. We did not wait. Harrison walked to the head of the massive table and pulled out the leather chair reserved for the CEO. I took my seat at the absolute head of the table, folding my hands over the leather portfolio Jamal had prepared. Harrison took the seat immediately to my right, signaling our unified front. The board members watched us in stunned silence. He handed a sealed folder to the lead investor, explaining the exact nature of the debt acquisition Cole Global had executed overnight. The board members quickly realized they were no longer dealing with a software dispute. They were sitting in a room with their new financial overlords. 10 minutes later, the doors swung open. Bradley marched into the boardroom, projecting false confidence. Savannah trailed closely behind him, clutching a designer handbag tightly against her side. She looked physically ill. I knew exactly why. Jamal had successfully frozen her Cayman Islands wire transfer 14 hours ago. She was currently trapped, unable to access the stolen funds. Bradley, oblivious to his fiancée's impending criminal charges, adjusted his jacket, prepared to deliver a persuasive speech begging investors for a 30-day grace period. He strode toward the head of the table, eyes focused on his documents. "Gentlemen," Bradley began, his voice artificially steady, "I know the operational downtime looks challenging, but my team is deploying a secondary protocol. We just need to restructure our debt obligations and extend the runway by 1 month." He finally looked up from his papers. The words died in his throat. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the head of the table. His mouth fell slightly open. Savannah bumped into his back, letting out a sharp gasp as she peered around his shoulder and saw me sitting in the chairman's seat. "What are you doing here?" Bradley demanded, his voice cracking violently. His false confidence shattered instantly. He looked wildly at the board members seeking intervention. "Why is she in this building? Security should have stopped her at the lobby. Cole, get out of my boardroom. You have no legal right to be on this property." Harrison leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cuffs with leisurely precision. He did not bother to answer. He simply looked at me, deferring the execution entirely to my command. I remained seated, my posture radiating absolute, unshakable authority. "I am not leaving, Bradley," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the long mahogany table. "In fact, I am the only person in this room who actually belongs in this specific chair." Bradley slammed his hands down on the nearest empty chair. "This is a closed meeting for the Apex Board of Directors and our key investors. You are a hostile competitor actively involved in litigation against us. I am calling the police." "Go right ahead," I countered smoothly. "I am sure the police would be highly interested in discussing your corporate finances. But before you dial, I suggest you ask your lead investor why nobody at this table has asked me to leave." Bradley turned his frantic gaze to the lead venture capitalist. The older man refused to meet his eyes, simply sliding Donovan's sealed folder across the table toward Bradley. Bradley snatched the folder, ripping it open. He scanned the top page, his eyes darting across the dense legal text. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the catastrophic reality of his situation. The paper trembled in his hands. "You bought our debt," he whispered, the sound barely escaping his lips. "You bought our commercial loans." "I did not buy them," I corrected sharply. "Cole Global bought them. Through a network of proxy firms, we purchased every single outstanding promissory note, warehouse lease, and fleet financing agreement you hold. We acquired your debt for pennies on the dollar because your creditors knew you were hopelessly insolvent without my algorithm running your trucks." Bradley staggered backward, hitting the wall. "You cannot do this. That debt is structured. I have a grace period." "You had a grace period." Harrison interjected, his voice cold and unforgiving. Read Clause 7B of your commercial loan agreement, Bradley. In the event of a total cessation of primary business operations, all outstanding debt becomes subject to immediate accelerated collection. You stopped operating yesterday afternoon when I shut off your software. You are in catastrophic default. I stood up slowly. You brought us all here to beg for a 30-day extension, I said. You thought you still had a company to save. You do not. As the primary debt holder, exercising the accelerated collection clause, Coal Global has legally seized your remaining tangible assets. Your board of directors just unanimously voted to surrender their remaining equity. They signed the transfer documents before you walked in. Bradley looked at the board members. None spoke. Savannah let out a terrified whimper, backing toward the door. I walked around the table, stopping inches from him. You do not own this company anymore, Bradley. I stated, my voice dripping with cold justice. I do. Now get out of my building. He stared at me, his chest heaving, as the absolute finality of my words crushed the last remnants of his arrogant pride. The logistics empire he stole from me was gone forever. Without uttering a single word, he turned and stumbled out the door. Savannah scrambled after him, desperate to escape my gaze. The room was finally mine. The room was finally mine. But the execution of this corporate slaughter was only half complete. Stop right there, I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air of the boardroom. Security guards, pre-positioned in the hallway by Harrison, immediately stepped into the doorway, blocking Bradley and Savannah from exiting. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, locking them inside the glass-walled room with us. The remaining board members watched in stunned fascination. Bradley turned around, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. You took my company, Allison. What else do you possibly want from me? I did not want anything from him. I wanted him to see the absolute truth of his own making. Savannah, sensing that the corporate ship had fully sunk, instantly pivoted to her final survival tactic. She grabbed Bradley's arm, pressing her face against his shoulder, and began to cry. It was a flawless, highly theatrical performance of devotion. Real tears streamed down her perfectly contoured cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. Bradley, it is okay. Savannah sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured vulnerability. We do not need this company. We do not need her or these aggressive people. We have each other. That is all that matters. You are a brilliant founder. We will start over. We will rebuild an even bigger empire together because I love you. She looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, playing the ultimate supportive partner. She was desperately trying to secure her grip on whatever personal wealth he had left. She needed him to believe she was his only remaining ally in a cruel, unfair world. Bradley placed a trembling hand over hers, his chest heaving as he bought into the toxic illusion. He glared at me, trying to muster a final shred of dignity. You can have the office, Allison. You can have the debt. But you will never have loyalty like this. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. Jamal walked in. My brother-in-law moved with the terrifying, unhurried confidence of an apex predator who had already cornered his prey. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit, his presence commanding absolute attention from every venture capitalist at the table. He did not look at me or Harrison. His eyes were locked dead onto Savannah. In his hands, he carried 3 thick, heavily redacted financial dossiers. The quiet click of his dress shoes against the polished floor sounded like a ticking time bomb. Jamal reached the massive conference table and dropped the dossiers onto the mahogany surface with a resounding thud. The sound made Savannah physically jump backward. You are not going to rebuild anything, Jamal stated, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the entire room. And you certainly do not love him. You love his access to unregulated venture capital. Bradley frowned, stepping slightly in front of Savannah. Who are you? Get out of my boardroom. You do not own this boardroom anymore, Bradley Harrison reminded him coldly. This is Jamal. He is a senior forensic accountant, and he is here at our exclusive invitation. Jamal unbuttoned his suit jacket and opened the first dossier. He spread a series of highly detailed banking statements across the table, making sure the remaining board members had a perfect view of the highlighted numbers. Let us talk about loyalty, Jamal said, looking directly at Bradley, but pointing his silver pen at Savannah. For the last 2 weeks, Your new executive here has been aggressively bypassing standard accounting protocols. She used the high-level security clearances you blindly authorized to access your emergency payroll reserves and your Series A venture capital funds. Savannah's face drained of all color. The fake tears instantly stopped. She released Bradley's arm and took a slow step backward, her eyes darting anxiously toward the locked doors. I have no idea what you are talking about. Savannah stammered, her voice pitching an octave higher in panic. These are fabricated documents. Bradley, they are trying to frame me. Jamal did not even blink. He pulled a second document from the dossier. It was a digital wire transfer log complete with IP addresses and authorization timestamps. Numbers do not lie, Savannah Jamal countered smoothly. And they certainly do not fabricate themselves. Yesterday afternoon, while Bradley was busy dealing with the complete collapse of his logistical network, you logged into the executive banking portal. You initiated a massive cash transfer. Bradley looked at Savannah, confusion warring with pure denial in his eyes. Savannah, what is he talking about? Jamal did not give her a chance to formulate another lie. He laid out the final piece of evidence, a printed ledger showing the exact routing sequence of the stolen funds in bright red ink. Savannah, you transferred $3.5 million of Apex investor funds to a shell corporation to pay off your debts at the Bellagio. Wire fraud and embezzlement. The words dropped into the boardroom like an anvil. The venture capitalists at the table gasped, leaning forward to frantically examine the documents Jamal had provided. The paper trail was absolute. It showed the money leaving Apex Logistics, bouncing through a newly formed LLC in Nevada, and landing directly in an offshore account associated with violent casino debt collectors. $3.5 million. One of the board members repeated, his voice shaking with fury as he glared at Bradley. You gave her the keys to our investment capital. Bradley stood entirely paralyzed. His brain struggled to process the horrific reality of the data presented before him. He looked down at the banking ledgers, his eyes tracing the undeniable digital signature Savannah had used to authorize the theft. He slowly turned his head to look at the woman he had abandoned me for. You stole from the company, Bradley whispered, his voice cracking violently. You stole from me. I was going to put it back, Savannah shrieked, completely abandoning her fragile persona. Her face twisted into an ugly, desperate snarl. I just needed a bridge loan. The casinos were going to break my legs, Bradley. You had plenty of money. You would not even miss it. A bridge loan, Jamal repeated with a dry, humorless laugh. You routed corporate funds across international borders to a Cayman Islands holding account before attempting to wire it to Las Vegas bookies. That is a federal crime. And furthermore, you completely failed. Savannah froze. What do you mean I failed? I mean I flagged the transaction with the federal banking authorities the exact second you pressed send, Jamal explained, closing the dossier with a sharp snap. The funds were frozen in transit. You did not pay off your casino debts. You just handed the federal government a perfectly packaged wire fraud conviction. Savannah let out a shrill, terrified scream. The facade of the devoted, loving partner was completely obliterated. She realized the money was gone, the company was gone, and her freedom was about to vanish entirely. She had played Lee, perfectly draining his company dry while convincing him he was a powerful, dominant founder. Now the brilliant illusion was reduced to a stack of banking statements on a boardroom table. I remained seated at the head of the table, watching the devastating fallout of their toxic alliance. Bradley had fired me because I was too intimidating and too analytical. He wanted a soft, compliant woman who made him feel like a king. Instead, he had handed his crown to a professional grifter who stripped his treasury bare and left him holding the bag for a multi-million-dollar federal crime. The exposure was absolute, leaving no shadows for either of them to hide behind. Bradley stared at the woman he had chosen over me. The color had completely vanished from his face, replaced by an ashen, sickly gray. His hands shook violently at his sides as the catastrophic reality of his situation fully registered in his mind. He had discarded a loyal, brilliant strategist for a mirage, and that illusion had just detonated his entire life in a spectacular fashion. You used me, Bradley whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of profound shock and rising fury. He took a heavy step toward Savannah, his fists clenching tight enough that his knuckles turned stark white. You came back, you pretended to love me, and you used me to pay off your gambling debts. You drained my company dry. Savannah did not shrink back. The fragile, helpless persona she had weaponized to manipulate his ego evaporated instantly in the cold light of the boardroom. Her posture shifted dramatically. Her shoulders squared, her jaw set, and her eyes hardened into twin chips of black ice. The sweet, supportive voice she had used to charm the venture capitalist mutated into a harsh, vicious screech. "Your company," Savannah mocked, letting out a sharp, hysterical laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. "You arrogant fool. You do not even own the software that runs your own trucks. You are completely incompetent. You handed me the keys to the treasury because you were so desperate to have a woman stroke your pathetic ego. You wanted to feel like a big, powerful founder, but you are nothing but a gullible mark." Bradley lunged forward, but the security guards instantly stepped inward, their massive frames creating an impenetrable barrier. He strained against them, spit flying from his lips as he screamed at her. "I trusted you. I gave you an executive title. I gave you everything. And you committed federal fraud under my roof. I am going to make sure you rot in a prison cell for the rest of your life. I will testify against you myself." Savannah's face twisted into an ugly, feral snarl. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Bradley's chest, unleashing her final desperate defense mechanism. "You are not testifying against anyone, you idiot. You are going down with me." Savannah shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the confined space. "Who do you think authorized my executive access? You did. Who signed off on the budget increase for research and development without reading a single page of the documentation? You did. I did not hack into the system, Bradley. You gave me the administrative passwords because you were too busy taking me to expensive lunches to actually do your job." The remaining board members watched the implosion with absolute disgust. The venture capitalist men who had previously been charmed by Savannah's soft familial energy now stared at a vicious calculating fraudster turning on her host. "I am going to tell the authorities that you orchestrated the entire thing," Savannah continued, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "I will tell them you knew about my debts and you authorized the transfer to hide your own failing business metrics. I will say I was just following your orders. I was just your subordinate. It is your signature on the executive authorization forms, Bradley." "You lying parasite," Bradley roared, thrashing wildly against the security guards. "I will destroy you. I will tear you apart in court." The screaming match devolved into a brutal, chaotic exchange of vulgar insults and frantic blame shifting. They tore into each other like starving animals fighting over a scrap of meat. The facade of the perfect loving couple, the lie that Bradley had sold to his investors about needing a family-oriented corporate culture, lay entirely shattered on the boardroom floor. They were exposing every ugly, greedy facet of their alliance to the very people they had tried to swindle. I sat perfectly still at the head of the table, watching them tear each other to pieces. I did not feel an ounce of pity. Bradley had demanded softness. He had demanded a woman who would not challenge his authority or intimidate his investors. He had received exactly what he asked for, and it had cost him $50 million and his entire professional reputation. Jamal stood near the projection screen, his arms crossed, watching the spectacular meltdown with cold, analytical detachment. He had followed the money, and the money had successfully detonated the bomb. He looked over at Harrison, giving a single subtle nod of absolute confirmation. Harrison remained seated to my right, his posture radiating relaxed, untouchable power. He observed the frantic screaming match for another full minute, allowing the venture capitalist to witness the absolute depths of Bradley's incompetence. Then Harrison reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out his sleek mobile phone. He did not raise his voice to compete with their screaming. He simply tapped a single button on his screen and set the phone flat on the mahogany table. The sharp metallic click of the device making contact with the wood drew the immediate attention of the room. Harrison looked up, his dark eyes cutting through the chaos like a laser. "You can save your arguments for the federal prosecutor." Harrison stated, his voice a low, lethal hum that instantly silenced the room. "Because neither of you is going to secure a favorable plea deal today." Bradley stopped struggling against the guards, his chest heaving as he stared at Harrison. Savannah froze, her chest rising and falling in rapid, terrified breaths. Harrison tapped the screen of his phone one more time, illuminating the display. 10 minutes ago, before Jamal presented the financial evidence to this board, I authorized my legal team to contact the federal authorities. Harrison continued smoothly. I informed them that a massive wire fraud operation had just been intercepted on my newly acquired corporate network. I provided them with the exact floor and room number of this meeting. Savannah let out a small, strangled gasp. She looked wildly at the heavy wooden doors, realizing there was absolutely no avenue of escape left for her. They were very interested in the Cayman Islands routing numbers. Harrison added a dark, predatory smile, curving his lips. The agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation White Collar Crime Division have been waiting in the lobby downstairs for the last 15 minutes. My head of security just escorted them into the private executive elevator. Bradley stumbled backward, his knees buckling slightly. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. He had not just lost his company, he had lost his freedom entirely. They will be stepping through those doors in exactly 30 seconds. Harrison finalized, leaning back in his chair with ultimate satisfaction. I suggest you both find a very good lawyer. The heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding crack that shattered the remaining tension in the room. 4 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation walked in their presence, instantly transforming the corporate sanctuary into a federal crime scene. They wore dark windbreakers with the agency letters printed boldly across the back, their expressions carved from stone. The lead agent, a tall woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped forward and flashed her gold badge. She did not look at the board members. She did not look at Harrison or myself. She scanned the room with predatory efficiency, her eyes instantly locking onto Savannah and Bradley. Savannah let out a choked gasp, stumbling backward until her spine hit the cold glass wall. The sudden realization that her flawless escape plan had completely evaporated left her hyperventilating. We have a federal warrant for the arrest of Savannah. The lead agent announced, her voice projecting with absolute chilling authority that demanded immediate compliance. You are being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement of corporate funds, and international money laundering. No, Savannah shrieked, her voice cracked, soaring into a pitch of pure, unrestrained panic. It was a mistake. I am innocent. He told me to do it. He authorized everything. 2 agents moved swiftly, flanking her on either side. Savannah thrashed wildly, her expensive silver designer gown twisting as she fought against their grip. She lashed out, her manicured nails clawing at the empty air, but the agents handled her with practiced, effortless efficiency. They grabbed her wrists, twisting them expertly behind her back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the silent boardroom. It was the sound of absolute finality, the undeniable end of her fraudulent charade. Please, Savannah wailed, hot tears streaming down her face, entirely ruining her carefully crafted makeup. Bradley, do something. Tell them you authorized it. You have to save me. I cannot go to prison. Bradley did not move an inch. He was completely paralyzed, his eyes wide with a horrific realization as he watched the woman he had traded my loyalty for being dragged toward the exit. Savannah kicked and screamed, begging anyone in the room to listen, but the venture capitalists simply turned their heads away in utter disgust. The agents pulled her forcefully through the doors, her hysterical sobbing echoing down the hallway until the elevator doors finally swallowed the sound entirely. The lead agent turned her attention back to the table. Jamal smoothly stepped forward, handing over a secure flash drive containing every single decrypted wire log, IP address, and forged authorization signature. The agent accepted the drive with a curt nod before her gaze shifted to Bradley. Her stare was clinical and merciless. We also need you to come with us, she stated flatly, stepping closer to the broken executive. You are being detained for questioning regarding your direct authorization of these illicit transfers. Based on the digital evidence we just received, you are currently facing potential charges of accessory to wire fraud, gross negligence, and severe breach of fiduciary duty. Bradley began to hyperventilate. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He looked at the federal agents, then at the furious board members who were already dialing their own legal teams to salvage whatever pennies they could from this disaster. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the crushing weight of a collapsing skyscraper. He was not just losing his company today, he was losing his freedom, his reputation, and every single cent to his name. The millions of dollars in venture capital debt would now fall squarely on his shoulders, securing his total and inescapable bankruptcy. His life as a respected Silicon Valley founder was over. He turned to look at me. The arrogant, condescending CEO who had stood on a gala stage and publicly fired me was entirely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified shell of a man realizing he had detonated his own universe. Bradley took a shaky step toward the head of the table. The security guards shifted, ready to intercept, but I raised my hand slightly, signaling them to hold their positions. I wanted to see exactly how low his desperation would push him. I wanted to witness the absolute destruction of his ego. His knees hit the polished hardwood floor with a heavy, pathetic thud. Bradley, the man who had demanded a soft, compliant partner to stroke his fragile ego, completely surrendered his pride. He crawled forward on his knees until he was positioned directly in front of my chair. He looked up at me, his eyes brimming with desperate, pathetic tears. His hands trembled as he reached out, hovering just inches from my skirt, too afraid to actually touch me. "Allison, please!" Bradley begged, his voice a ragged, pathetic whisper that barely carried across the room. I was stupid. I was blinded. We built this together. Save me. I sat perfectly still, looking down at the man kneeling at my feet. I searched myself for even a microscopic fraction of sympathy, a single drop of pity for the 4 years of my life I had invested in him. I found absolutely nothing. The well was completely dry. He was looking for the supportive partner he had discarded, but that woman no longer existed. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Harrison watched me from my right, his expression completely neutral, trusting me to deliver the final blow. Jamal stood by the projection screen, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. The venture capitalists watched with bated breath, witnessing the ultimate destruction of a man who had tried to play a game far beyond his intellectual capacity. I slowly leaned forward in my leather chair. I rested my forearms on the mahogany table and looked directly into Bradley's tear-filled eyes. My face remained a mask of flawless, terrifying calm. I did not raise my voice. I did not express any anger. I delivered my verdict with the clinical precision of a surgeon cutting out a malignant tumor. "I told you, Bradley," I stated, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of mercy. "You fired the brain, now you are just the corpse." I pushed my chair back and stood up. I picked up my leather briefcase, securing the clasps with a sharp, definitive click. I did not give him another second of my time. I stepped forward, literally stepping over his kneeling, trembling form, as if he were nothing more than an inconvenient piece of trash left on the floor. I did not look back. I walked confidently toward the heavy mahogany doors, the sharp, rhythmic sound of my heels cutting through the silence of the room. Harrison and Jamal fell into step right beside me, a unified front of absolute power and undeniable victory. We walked out of the boardroom, leaving Bradley sobbing on the floor, surrounded by federal agents and ruined investors. The doors swung shut behind us, sealing him inside the burning wreckage of his own arrogant choices. The empire he thought he controlled was gone, and I was stepping into a new world completely untouchable. 6 months passed with the blinding speed of a perfectly executed hostile takeover. The corporate entity known as Apex Logistics was officially erased from existence. Every truck, every warehouse, and every viable contract had been meticulously absorbed into the Cole global empire. I oversaw the integration personally, stripping away the bloat and inefficiencies Bradley had allowed to fester. Under my operational command, Cole Global expanded its market share by an unprecedented 40%. The industry quickly learned that my algorithm was the true heartbeat of modern logistics, and anyone who doubted my capability was silenced by the staggering quarterly revenue reports. Our success proved that logic and precision will always defeat superficial charm. As for the architects of my temporary downfall, the justice system handled them with exactly the lack of mercy they deserved. Savannah had taken a swift plea deal to avoid decades behind bars, trading her designer gowns for a federal prison uniform. She had nowhere left to run, and no men left to manipulate. She was currently serving an 8-year sentence for international wire fraud and embezzlement. Bradley, stripped of his wealth, his reputation, and his enablers, proved entirely unequipped to handle federal litigation. He was currently awaiting formal sentencing, facing a mandatory minimum of 5 years in a medium security facility for his role in authorizing the fraudulent transfers. He tried to reach out to me once, sending a desperate letter from his holding cell begging for character leniency. I returned the envelope unopened. The corporate war was over, but the alliances forged in the fires of that conflict remained unbreakable. On a crisp Friday evening, the celebration moved from the boardroom to a private dining suite at one of Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouses. The room smelled of aged leather-roasted garlic and expensive red wine. Sitting around the circular mahogany table were the people who had engineered the greatest corporate coup of the decade. I sat next to Harrison, the heavy diamond engagement ring still resting perfectly on my left hand. Across from us sat my sister Rachel and her husband Jamal. Rachel looked radiant, her sharp protective energy softening in the presence of genuine victory. Jamal was busy analyzing the extensive wine list with the exact same forensic precision he used to dismantle fraudulent offshore shell companies. At the head of the table sat Richard Cole, the formidable chairman of Cole Global and Harrison's father. Richard was a man who demanded excellence and rarely handed out compliments. Tonight, however, his commanding presence was tempered by a rare, booming joviality. He raised his crystal glass of Cabernet, signaling the table for a toast. The quiet chatter instantly ceased. Richard looked at Jamal first, nodding with profound respect. "The federal auditors are still talking about the encrypted dossier you handed them," Richard said, his gravelly voice filled with absolute approval. "I have employed entire departments of corporate investigators who could not trace offshore wire fraud with half your speed. You are an exceptional talent, Jamal." My sister beamed with pride as Jamal raised his own glass in silent, confident acknowledgement. Then Richard's sharp, assessing gaze shifted directly to me. He studied me for a long moment, the intimidating weight of a seasoned billionaire weighing my true value. When Harrison said he found my daughter-in-law, I thought it was a corporate stunt. Richard laughed, a deep, incredibly genuine sound that echoed right off the private dining room walls. "I did not expect you to be the sharpest executive in the state. You did not just secure our domestic expansion, Allison. You rewrote the rules of the entire industry." I raised my glass to meet his. "I told your son I do not do soft, Richard. I build empires and I protect them." Richard smiled, tapping his glass against mine. "And for that, Cole Global is permanently in your debt." The dinner continued with rich food and sharp strategic conversation. But as the evening progressed, I found my attention drifting away from the corporate triumphs and settling entirely on the man sitting beside me. Harrison rested his arm casually on the back of my chair. His physical proximity no longer felt like a calculated move for a public audience. It felt entirely natural, a grounding force that I had come to rely on. What had started as a cold, mutually beneficial business transaction had quietly fundamentally shifted. We spent the last 6 months fighting side by side in the trenches of corporate warfare. We shared late nights analyzing logistics data, early mornings coordinating legal strikes, and countless moments of silent, perfectly synchronized understanding. Harrison never once asked me to diminish my intelligence to make him feel larger. He never asked me to soften my edges or conform to an outdated standard of what a partner should be. He demanded my absolute best, and he matched it with his own. I looked at his profile as he discussed international shipping routes with Jamal. He slowly turned his head, sensing my direct gaze, and his dark eyes softened instantly. The ruthless executive melted away, leaving only the man who had recognized my worth when the rest of the world was watching me burn. He reached under the heavy wooden table, his warm fingers finding mine and intertwining them effortlessly. It was not a calculated gesture meant for his father or the board of directors. It was a genuine, quiet promise made purely for us. The fake engagement, initially just a tactical maneuver designed to manipulate a traditional corporate structure, had blossomed into profound mutual respect and love. We had built a massive foundation of absolute trust, forged in the fires of a hostile takeover and solidified by an undeniable magnetic attraction. I squeezed his hand back tightly, feeling the solid, heavy weight of the diamond ring resting against my skin. I never ever wanted to take it off again. I had walked into his glass office seeking ruthless revenge, but I had ultimately found my true equal. I stepped into my expansive corner office at Cole Global early the next Monday morning. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered an uninterrupted, breathtaking view of the Manhattan skyline. The city stretched out below me, a sprawling grid of concrete steel and endless ambition. I walked over to the window and placed my palm flat against the cool glass, feeling the steady, vibrating hum of the metropolis. 6 months ago, I was standing backstage at a corporate anniversary party in Seattle, waiting for a man I loved to publicly acknowledge my massive contributions. Instead, he handed my life over to a parasite and had security guards ready to throw me out into the street. He thought stripping my title and humiliating me in front of 300 industry elites would permanently break my spirit. He believed I would simply vanish into obscurity, weeping over a lost relationship and a stolen career. I let out a slow, deeply contented breath. Looking down at the bustling streets of New York, from the absolute summit of the logistics industry, I realized that catastrophic public firing was the single greatest gift Bradley could have ever given me. If he had not betrayed me on that stage, I would have spent the rest of my life building castles for a mediocre man who was fundamentally terrified of my intelligence. I would have spent decades shrinking myself, dimming my own brilliance just to protect his incredibly fragile ego. Losing everything in that singular moment of public humiliation was the exact violent catalyst I needed to finally claim my true worth. I walked away from the window and moved toward my massive, polished executive desk. There was no cheap cardboard box sitting on top of it, waiting for me to pack up my belongings. There was no fake sympathy, no aggressive gaslighting, and absolutely no corporate incompetence. The pristine workspace was covered in high-level acquisition reports, global expansion blueprints, and the finalized signed absorption documents of the company I used to call home. I sat down in the heavy leather chair, feeling the absolute weight and undeniable reality of my power. For a long time, society taught women like me that we needed to soften our edges, that we needed to be accommodating, quiet, and easily managed to be loved or valued in any capacity. Bradley demanded wife material energy because he lacked the intellectual capacity to operate alongside a true equal. He chose a professional grifter who stroked his ego while actively robbing him blind. Savannah played the fragile, innocent victim perfectly, and she rode that pathetic performance straight into a federal prison cell. The absolute destruction of their toxic alliance taught me a profound, undeniable lesson about human nature and corporate warfare. I finally understood the core truth of my journey. True power does not come from screaming your worth at people who are determined to diminish you. True power does not come from begging for a seat at a table run by arrogant, insecure fools. True power comes from walking away, completely removing those toxic individuals from your life entirely and allowing their own massive incompetence to completely destroy them. The heavy double doors of my office swung open with a smooth, quiet click. Harrison walked in holding 2 steaming cups of black coffee. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, his presence commanding the vast room without a single word. He walked over to my desk and set one of the cups down right next to my legal pad. He did not ask if I was busy. He did not tell me to smile. He simply leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing his arms as he looked at me with that same dark, predatory respect he showed me on the very first night we met. We had a global board meeting in exactly 20 minutes, and we were about to launch a hostile bid for the largest European shipping conglomerate in the market. We were operating at a level Bradley could never have even hallucinated in his wildest dreams. My brother-in-law Jamal had already sent over the highly encrypted forensic risk assessments for the European target, ensuring our financial vanguard was entirely bulletproof. My sister Rachel had sent a quick morning text reminding me to absolutely destroy the competition. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee, maintaining direct, unwavering eye contact with Harrison. The heavy emerald-cut diamond ring on my left hand caught the morning sunlight flashing brilliantly across the walls of the executive suite. It was no longer a prop or a tactical corporate shield to appease a board of directors. It was a genuine promise between two apex predators who had conquered the industry side by side. We were building an untouchable empire together, an empire founded on sharp intellect, mutual respect, and absolute loyalty. I stood up from my desk, picking up the thick acquisition file for our next global target. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored designer blazer, feeling utterly invincible. I had walked into Cole Global half a year ago with nothing but my brain, a laptop, and a burning desire for cold, calculated justice. I utilized my intellect, my legal strategy, and my unyielding resilience to completely eradicate the people who tried to bury me. I turned a devastating, soul-crushing betrayal into the most spectacular, lucrative ascension of my entire life. I walked toward the boardroom doors with Harrison right beside me, ready to conquer the next continent.